Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant. And in this video, I want to take a step back from our CRUD here, this records management, and actually work on a compliance reporting piece. So, this compliance reporting piece is in the same HTML file, it's our same operations HTML file, but I would like to populate something. And simply, this is just going to be a reference. It would be a little bit too complex to just build out a basic reporting system, given the different type of compliances that may exist within various organizations, as well as templates used or whatnot, reporting ways that they need to report to both the federal and the state level. But I do want to provide something here, and I want that to be dynamic. I don't want it to just be statically built within our HTML and never changeable. Unless, of course, you went into the code and actually hard coded something different in there. And what I was thinking about doing was putting a table in here within our HTML. And where I want this table to be populated from is, let's come over here to our database sheet. And I created this operations tab. And what I did was I created just a very simple sample table, so to speak, with each column header being report title, report content, report due, and applicable companies. So it's pretty self-explanatory what, the name of the report, what the report is, when it's typically due by. I put some in there that may pop up with certain states, and also some common ones that are found throughout the uh, industry with individual employers. Now, the great thing about doing it this way instead of hard coding it is we can actually change the data in here. And we'll see that once we get it built. We can add in another report, and that will automatically pull into that HTML box. So it's best to do things like this, if at all possible, dynamically, so anybody can just come in here and maintain the database as opposed to having to go in and re-hard code it. So let's go over to our code here, and I'm going to put this on our operations page, of course. And in our operations page, we have two essential sections. We have the record section, we have the compliance section. Now, both of these are set to none until the subcategory boxes switch to either records or compliance reporting, and then this will toggle to block as necessary. But I want to put in a table here. Since we are using Bootstrap as a front-end toolkit, let's go to our Bootstrap page here. Okay, and let's look at tables. Now, one thing you got to be careful about tables, tables can be horrific when it comes to screen readers. So when you're doing your testing or your accessibility criteria compliance, you should always go in and check to make sure that the tables, the images, and even the typography aren't really messing with the screen readers. So that's just a little tidbit of information. So let's click on the tables here, and let's find a table that we like. Well, that was kind of boring. Let's grab. Oh, I do like the hoverable rows. That's kind of nice. So let's actually just come up here and just grab this one, and then we'll cut out stuff and modify it as we need it. So let's see, let me grab this. Table dark is nice. We work with that one. Striped and hoverable. Okay. So now let's grab that and come back over here to our code, and we'll put that just right here. Okay, so now let's build this thing out. So let's focus on this table class. So I don't want it to be the dark color. I do like the secondary, that nice gray color. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. And we want it table striped. Because see, if we just leave it like this, let's just save this and come back over here. We'll refresh this. Because I mean, if we just leave it, essentially bland, refresh it. There we go. And we just leave it, essentially bland, it's going to look like this. Right. And oh, that's right. Yep. I have that table already built in. So this color is actually the same color here. I just used CSS on another piece, and I obviously used it as a class table. So we'll look at this once we actually get it done and see if we like it or not. I do like that since it matches the theme we have going on. But we don't necessarily, I do like the gray here, but we don't need any of this data right here because we're going to populate that data dynamically. And we also would like it hoverable and maybe a border here. So let's go ahead and go back to our code here and do some of that things. And you can get this all from Bootstrap, essentially what we were just looking at. I'll go back to it and show you what I mean. So if we wanted the table to be, dark or secondary or whatnot, that's what this piece here would come from. And then if we wanted to be hovered, the hovering piece, we can do that. So we would need table striped, table hovered, and then other things that we can do, table borders. Here we go. So we can do the table bordered, and then we can select the border type, table dark. So this is where you can get all this information on how to style and modify and change. So I'm not just doing this I'm not just doing this straight out of my head because I'm not that good. I'm not sure ever will be. But we have the table secondary. So let's do table striped to give every other row a different color, and then we'll do table hover. And then we wanted to add a border, maybe just a dark border. We'll just use the built-in let's see. Let me go back here and make sure I'm spelling that right. Yep. Okay, table bordered, and then we have to declare the border color, and we'll just use their dark breakdown. And now what we'd like to do is give this table itself, the whole thing, an ID, because we need an ID to push the information to it and from it, I suppose. So let's call this HR reports table, I guess. That'll work. So we're going to need this table head. Now the table head, let's give this table head a class. And this class is going to be that table dark. But let me come over to our CSS and see what I actually... Okay, so this table head, TH right here, is that color important? Okay, so it really doesn't matter. It's just going to be that. I won't have to do it later. So it's just going to be that nice dark brown color that we have in our theme. This TH here. So we need our TR. These are our table rows. And this first row is our header. This TH is our header. So we need to ensure that our headers match. In order for us, the way that we're going to build it dynamically, we need to make sure that our headers match exactly. So report title, report content, report due, and applicable companies. So we need to change this. We don't need the number. This is going to be report title. This is going to be report content. You have to pay attention to the capitalization in this as well. It's case sensitive. And this is a report due, and this is going to be applicable companies. Okay, so that's going to take care of, this takes care of our header, that very first row. And that's encased in our T head. Now, the body of this is each and every single row. So if you save this, and just remember we have this Mark Auto person and then this other Larry the Bird in row 3 and row 1. When we come back here and refresh our page, if you're building it within the HTML, it typically does not, this is just how they have it focused, but it typically doesn't really align or really matter what you call the header up here. If you're building it in HTML, you just need to make sure that everything is aligned under the appropriate one. But since we're building this dynamically, we're actually going to use these headers to essentially match, because what we're going to do is we're going to take our data that we pull from our Google Sheets and turn it into what's called JavaScript object notation. We're going to turn it into a JSON to send it over here to build our table out with our data. So let's come back over here and you'll see that the first row, that T head, is going to be 1. So that was that very first report title. And then Mark would fall under that second head, auto, here, MDO, there. But since we're going to build everything out dynamically, we don't need any of this within our T-body tag. We just need it to be blank so we can populate it. We can just say populating dynamically. Dynamically. There we go. And then looking at this, that looks good. So now we should just have a blank table with these headers. So now what we need to do is we need to go over to our JavaScript piece and ensure that we have a way to grab this information. We'll do that with a Google script run with success, send it over to our Google Apps script, have our Google Apps script run, send something back, and then populate the information there. We'll do that with literals. So, and I'll explain what those are here in a second. So let's go over to our operations.js. And I made a section here for compliance reporting. That's where we'll put our code. And what we're wanting to do is to grab this information once the DOM content loaded. So we're already grabbing the drop-down categories. We're already grabbing the record section drop-down categories. So let's go ahead and add another one in here. And after these two are gathered, we want to get something else. We want to get Google script run, and this is also going to be with a success handler. And the Google Apps script function that we would like to run, let's just call it get HR reports. I guess that'll work. I'm going to have to remember that there's 2 capital R's there, but I think that'll work. And then what we're going to want to do is after this comes back, whatever this returns, we want to run another function in our JavaScript. And we'll call that function, we'll just call it simply render table. Okay, so now we need to create this get HR reports. So let's come over to our main GS file. And since we try to keep everything reading like a book from top to bottom, we'll come all the way down here to the bottom and create this function. And this function is going to be called get HRR reports. Let me make sure I spell that right or it's not going to work. Yep. Okay, and we're not really receiving anything from that because there's nothing to receive. We're just wanting it to regurgitate something back. So let's just create a constant here. And let's create something simple. We'll just call it, data. And this data is going to come from our operations file. So we have already this ops compliance sheet. If you don't have this yet, just type it in. It's a global variable now. And we're going to use this sheet to get the values of the whole thing. So when we look over here, there's nothing else on this sheet. And I mean, honestly, I think what we're going to do is just keep this to where it's nothing but reporting. So what we can do is instead of selecting row 2, column 1, and then however many rows, we can just get the entire data range. Everything with data on here, because we don't have data over here or over here. It's all in a nice little square box with no gaps. So let's start building that out. We have our data variable that we're calling it, constant data. And what we're going to do with this is we are going to use our ops compliance sheet. And in that, we are going to get our data range. That's just going to return everything from us. And then we want to get the values. So now let's log this out and see what is actually being produced here. Because we may have to handle something within our code. And we won't know that until we see how the data is coming to us. We will have to take care of that first row. So as you can see, it's coming to us in a 2-dimensional array because it's get values. And then it also appears that we are getting this head in the index 0. Okay, so we've got to handle that. So let's erase this log. And then what we're going to want to do now is convert to JSON format. So anytime that you write to typically I found anyway, anytime you write to a table or even a Google chart or something like that, it's a lot easier to take this 2-dimensional array and put it into a JSON format. I'm not going to dip into JSON here. If you would like me to put together a JSON tutorial video, I'll be more than happy to. Just send us an email in our description box, and I'll be happy to put one together. But JSON is just easier and more straightforward to work with when you're trying to populate visuals such as graphs, tables, or whatnot. At least I found out. So let's create a constant here, headers. Let's take care of these headers. And since it is a 2-dimensional array, and that array that header exists in the 0 index, that very first spot, we can simply do data.shift. And what this is going to do, this is going to remove the headers at the 0 index in the array. There we go. So now that we took the headers, out. We're going to have to use this to do a for each. So this will be our actual piece that we're going to be cycling through. Because this, if you think about it, when we shift it, it's changing the original array data, removing that first element at the 0 index, and then storing it in a new array headers. So we're going to have to use that headers to run our for each. And what we're going to want to do here is we are going to want to return the map of this data. And again, if you want me to put together a JSON tutorial working with Google Sheets, I'll be more than happy to. But for now, we want this to return the data map, and we want to map that data. And then we'll just call this row, because that's really what we're looking for. We'll use the arrow function. And what we want to map is a new object. So let's just we want to create an object here. Let's just create this as record equals that. Remember, when you have the curly brackets in a variable, that is an empty object. And let's just create a comment here so we follow along. We'll use an object to map the header there to the values. So essentially what we're doing is we are taking a header. Let's come back over here. We are taking a header, our report title, these 4 headers right here, and then we're rolling through our data and we're grabbing EEO1 report, mapping it to that. OSHA, mapping it to that. The report dues, same exact thing. We're mapping it to each header. And that's going to come back to us essentially as a JSON, a JavaScript object notation, because we are sending it to JavaScript. And then we're going to populate it with JavaScript. So I hope that makes sense. And now we need to run a for each to actually do that mapping. So we want to go headers. Do we call it headers or headers? Yep, headers. And then we want to do for each. And this for each is now going to take the value of the object and the index number, because we do care where the index is in order to map it to those headers. So it's going to take the header. And remember, this isn't headers. This is just something that we're identifying, as well as the index. Remember, when you put 2 different arguments within a function sort of like this, you got to have that space in there. And then we'll use our arrow notation. And okay, so let's think about this. So we want to fill this record object, and what we want to fill it with is the header, which is what we're passing right here. And we want to do that if our row, this map row, based on our index. Okay, so what we're doing is, okay, something's a little wonky here. Oh, I'm missing I'll take care of that in a second. Let's write a comment here. So what we're doing is essentially we are mapping the values to the corresponding headers. Perfect. Okay, so now let's scroll down here. We have this one. Let's go through and make sure that we have all of our little stuff here. So let's see. Oh, yeah, with JavaScript or Google Apps Script, when you just type that, it automatically produces the closing one. And sometimes at least for me, it really throws me off sometimes. Okay, so now we have that. So now we're going to need See, that is our for each. So we're going to need another bracket here. And this is going to need the closing one. Okay, so for each contains this. This is the arrow function. So we're not having to write out function. This is the other bracket. This is that one. Okay, so that was good. And now this one is going to need our closing bracket there. Usually I write out all the closing brackets first before I do that. And this is exactly the reason why it got me this time. And now what we're going to want to do is after our for each, we want to return the record, this object, so then we can finish the map. So let's return record. And what this record, where this record is going, it's going now back to our JavaScript file, our HTML site. So now let's go back over here. And what it's getting sent to is this render table. So we need to create that render table. So let's come down here and create our function render table. And there we go. So this render table is going to receive information back. And let's just call this data for now. I don't think I use that anywhere else here. No. So that'll be unique. And we want to access and grab our table body initially. So let's create a variable. Let's call that table body. Now the table body is going to be equal to the document dot get element by ID, and that ID is going to be whatever it is that we named our table body. And we named our table HR reports table. So that's what we're wanting to select. And then what we're wanting to do is we want to get every single row. Because if you remember right, when we put in data, since we have 4 columns in our table, we need 4 columns every time. And what we're trying to do is populate these. So what we need to do is we need to do a query selector of our table body in order to populate that stuff dynamically. So we can simply carry on this table body variable and use query. See, we've already used query selector all, but what we want to do is simply query selector. Oops, spell that wrong. There we go. Query selector. And what we want to do is grab that T body. Now this T body is a tag. So when you come over here and you'll notice this T body is a tag. So we don't need the dot or the hashtag or anything like that. Just call it straight how it is. And so it's looking like this. Sorry, I apologize. It looked like it didn't transfer over. It's looking like this right here. We created a variable after we created our render table data. Now this data is going to be received from our Google Apps script, and we're just giving that data that's being returned simply the ID or references data. And we need to get our HR reports table, which is the whole table. And then within that table, what we're wanting to do is do a query selector on the T body. And now we need to do another for each. I hope you all are starting to see just how convenient and helpful for eaches and loops are. So what we need to do is we need to take this data that's coming to us, which is our values mapped to each head or header. And then we need to create an element of TR, and then we can essentially use a technique in JavaScript to then run and populate that every single time. Okay, so let's come down here and let's grab our data. And we want to run a for each. Okay, so now that's going to populate. And we're going to have to include in here this equal sign and that. Okay, there we go. Arrow function. And what we're going to do here is let's just, since we're populating a row, we'll just use row as our identifier here. And what we're wanting to do is create an element TR. And this TR is the table row. It's this. So we want to create this and then dynamically run through the data coming over and then assign each value to one table row and then keep doing it until we run out of data. So to do that, we are going to need to create a variable. Let's just call this variable TR. Keep it simple. And the great thing about this is you'll have this code, and this code can be used for any and all tables that you want to create. You just have to adjust it. And what the element we are wanting to create is TR. Now we can actually start building our rows. And remember, the TR contained the TD. So when we come over here to let's look at our bootstrap example here. You'll see that a TR, once you got the head out of the way, the body, the TR contained, the header here, but really we're looking for the TD. So this is what we're trying to create inside or populate inside every single TR and keep going until we run out of data. So to do that, we want to call our TA or TR and set the inner HTML, because we're using HTML here because we're populating it to HTML. And what we're going to need to do here is what's called a template literal. And again, I'm not going to go too in depth to this, but just know that a template literal has these backticks. And it's not that. As you notice, these are actually considered, quotation marks or forward ticks. We're looking for back ticks. And you can see how the tick is actually back. And that typically exists over on this key right here, or next to the one on most keyboards. But in order to produce a template literal, you need this backtick. And what a template literal is it's a way to create strings. So this is a string that we're sending over to HTML, and it allows for the expressions of the of the strings in a multi-line format. So essentially, it embeds the expressions directly into strings, and then you can also make a multi-line if possible. So, and that's what's so important here, is because if we remember back on how that table was structured in HTML, it's multi-line. So that's just a good way to remember it when we're writing into tables this way. We need the backticks. So we have our initial template literal, and we now need to create the TDs. So now when we're writing a HTML, we don't want it to render as HTML right here. We want it to render as HTML when it is placed. So we'll use the tags, and that's where these backticks come in handy. We'll use the tags, and what we're going to need to do is go through our row, find report title, and then populate the data for each and every line of information we have. And since we're using template literals, what we're going to have to do is a dollar sign. Now, what a dollar sign essentially is in JavaScript is called an expression interpolation. And anytime we use a dollar sign, we need to use the curly brackets as well. And what the dollar sign curly bracket allows us to do is when we're using template literals, we can insert dynamic values or even execute expressions in that, but we're inserting the values for each row. So even though this is a string, we are able to jump out of this essentially, grab the row that's coming out for each, and then throw it in that literal. So to do that, we would simply say row, row, and the row is going to belong to report title. Now, one thing that I've noticed, having multiple hands in a database, sometimes they kind of change things. So let's just add an or here just to be on the safe side, and we'll also say report title, because depending on how you send data or retrieve data, you can either do it by named versions, and let's just put this in here just to be on the safe side in case that header changes on the sheet. And let's end this. There we go. So now we have this. So now what we can do is create the other ones. Dollar sign, curly brackets, row. Now this is an error. That's not going to work, because that should be there. There we go. Because the curly brackets have to contain everything that you're wanting to contain, because this is what it's essentially jumping out of this and getting, and then bringing back to it. So the curly brackets need to be on the end there. So that needs to be there, and this should be right here. Now the next one is going to be our report content, and let's do the same thing just to be on the safe side. Report content TD, and let's just copy this and do it 2 more times. It's not going to be report content here. It's going to be report do, and then this one is going to be our applicable companies. And then we'll do the same camel case here, just in case it does happen to get populated, depending on how we're pushing to our sheet with the ID. Okay, good. So now we have that. Now, since we used a backtick up here, we have to close it with a backtick. So close that. Okay, there we go. So now what we want to do is every time this thing runs, we want to send it over to our table body, which we have stored right here. So to do that, we simply call our table body, and we want to append the child, and that child that we're wanting to append is this TR. And let's put a semicolon here to end it, and that should be it. Let's see if we get this first try and don't have to troubleshoot. So let's save this. Okay, let's come over to our form here. Let's refresh it. One good way to notice if you don't have any spelling errors is if any functionality works. Typically, you don't have a spelling error. Okay, good. No spelling errors. Now let's see if it's pulling things correctly. Yep, sure is. Sure is. Now, if this wasn't populating, that would mean that it's either not pulling correctly, but typically, since we're not copying and pasting things over, we're kind of just writing from scratch. We don't really have those spelling errors unless we made them ourselves. But good. That makes me happy. And populating dynamically. What is this? Oh, see, spoke too soon. Okay, so we have this populating dynamically thing / I'm thinking, let's go look at this. Oh, I know where this is. This is in the HTML portion because what I was attempting to do was use the comment method for JavaScript, but I was trying to do it in HTML. So that is an easy fix. So let's go over to our page, our operations page here. And instead of this, it's going to be the HTML comment. Why they use different versions to comment, I'm not sure, but it is what it is. So now we can save it and come back to our page here. And we'll refresh it, come down to operations, compliance reporting, and there we go. Perfect. So now we just have a simple reference. And of course, this is now dynamic, so we can change anything we want. So let's go in here and let's add something in here that I don't think I put in here. Nope. Okay, now this is just samples. Now this doesn't pertain to it. There is no blanket compliance reporting really, because it really depends on your industry as well as your state and how many employees you have, and even your own company strategy on when you want to do like an employee turnover report, background checks or whatnot. But let's do one that's called not employee engagement. Let's call it employee experience. So let's come back over here to our page here. And let's just insert it right above here's pay equity analysis. And let's call this employee experience audit. Content audit results on the employee experience throughout the employee lifecycle. Just do that. And then the report due. I usually like to do these when I was working for companies. I like to do these ideally annually, because once you get into a rhythm on what it is you want to check, or if you're using individuals to just jump in through like a recruitment or whatnot, once you get into a rhythm of doing these soft audits, annually is really nothing. Let's just do this. Varies based on company, just like that. Okay, so now we're going to have, when we refresh this, we're going to have this new piece in between FMLA and pay equity. And this is just to illustrate the dynamic nature of this and how beneficial it is to have it come dynamically as opposed to having it hard coded in there. And as you can see, it doesn't take much performance bandwidth to actually produce it. And as we can do, there it is. So now we're able to change this reference table based on that spreadsheet. And that is how you populate a HTML table from a Google Sheet using AppScript. I hope this video was informative. If it was, please hit that subscribe button. If you would like to have me go more in depth or explain maybe JSON or those template literals or whatnot further or in more detail, please let me know. Just shoot me an email. And until next time, please take care.